Good afternoon, everyone. I hope you're all well and you can hear me okay. My name's Henry. I'm a business development manager here at NQA. We're here this afternoon for a 45-minute webinar on a pretty hot topic currently, which is energy and sustainability. I'm going to start off today with a very quick overview of NQA, so who we are and what we do. Then I'll be passing you over to Nick, who you can see on your screen for the main part of the webinar. So Nick, if you can, next page, please. Oh.
Oh, sorry everybody, bear with us. We've just seemed to have lost Nick. I'm sure he'll be back on in 2 seconds. Sorry for the delay.
Well, we can see Nick. Nick, can you do the presenting as well? And you're muted.
So show my screen, put that on. It just for whatever reason, just didn't want to let me press go on the.
Perfect. That's, I think, hopefully, Natalie, can you just confirm everyone can see? Yeah.
Yeah, if you could just pop it into presentation mode again, that would be great. Perfect. Thank you.
Lovely.
Great.
Sorry about that, guys. that really wasn't planned, was it? You know.
No, it wasn't. Right. So yes, who are NQA? As you can see, we're a global certification body. We're owned by a large American company called NTS, who are leaders in the testing and inspection industry. We have a large number of standards that we certify to, covering a range of management systems. We've been around for well over 30 years now. We have over 1,000 employees globally with over 50,000 active certificates. That breaks down to just over 100 employees in the UK with 12,000 active certificates. We have an average partnership of over 10 years, which when you consider the certification cycle is 3 years, you can see that there's a high retention of clients. This is also backed up by our Net Promoter Score, which is a metric calculating the likelihood that a customer would recommend a company or product to a colleague and friend. The range generally is between -100 to +100, and NQA are sat at 70, which is the highest within our industry. The core standards in the UK are the big three, so the 9001, 14001 and 45001. However, given the recent pandemic, we have seen a large increase in 27001, which is information security. Obviously, with more people working from home now, information security has become high in importance. Another standard we've seen recently is PAS 2060. It's a standard around carbon neutrality, obviously very high on the agenda worldwide with global warming and climate change taking effect. Companies such as yourselves are now looking at how they can reduce their carbon footprint, obviously to make the world a cleaner place. The standard has picked up huge momentum, and we receive a high number of inquiries from a range of different industries and different size companies around how NQA can verify them to the standard. So looking at the infographic, as you can see, in the US, we're the #1 certification body in the aerospace sector with extremely high level clients there. And we're also #1 in China in the automotive sector by a long stretch, and with a global #1 certification body in the telecoms and automotive sector. Right, next page, please, Nick, fingers crossed.
Hopefully, it doesn't kick me off when I do this.
Yeah.
There we go. I think I've got this now.
Well done, great. So the certification services and training that we offer on the basic standards I mentioned earlier, the quality, environmental, health and safety, as well as 50,001, which is energy management, 27,001, which is information security, 22,301, which is business continuity, which is a nice follow-on from the information security. 13485, which is medical devices, IATF and automotive for the aerospace standards. All of our training services are available both face-to-face or online. Obviously, we've had to make all the training online recently due to COVID, and we've seen a high number of successful remote training for our clients. Next slide, please, Nick. So yeah, nationwide training service for all of our clients. We also offer completely free e-learning for existing clients. So however many employees you have in your organisation who you wish to upskill, we offer that for free. Even if you're not an existing client, it's really not expensive, and they are good courses, and most of the NQA team have actually taken the courses as part of their induction. We offer in-house training as well, so if you have around 5 to 6 employees in your organisation you feel would benefit from a training course, whether it be implementation of a particular standard or up to an internal auditor or even lead auditor level, we'd arrange one of our trainers to visit you on site to deliver the requested training. We also have public training courses, so we run these across hotels across the UK. Again, this has been conducted remotely recently. However, this year we are getting back to providing this service in person. And if there is any other further information that you'd like to see, you can head over to our website, the NQA website. Next page, please, Nick. So yeah, as mentioned earlier, the PAS 2060 piece, which is an area NQA are particularly focusing on currently. We're running monthly 2-day training courses on the introduction and implementation of this standard, which has been really well received and is providing a great help to our clients who are implementing this important standard. Again, all the relevant information about the course, the book dates and the price is available on our website, so do feel free to take a look. And if you have any further questions, you can reach one of our sales team through either web chat, inquiry form, or the good old-fashioned telephone, and they'll be happy to help. Next page, please, Nick. So yeah, that's NQA. Thank you for listening to me. As promised, I'm now going to hand you over to Nick Linklater, who is the MD of Green Team Consulting, and he's going to discuss sustainability and the need for data in compliance. So over to you, Nick.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for taking the time to listen. It's obviously a very broad subject and there's only a limited amount of time, so I'm going to try and cover as much as I can, and we've got a question section which we'll do at the end. If something in the middle comes up and it's kind of mega burning, questions are kind of flying in front of me, so if I can, I'll answer it as we go along, but otherwise we'll do things as we get to the end, and fingers crossed no more technical issues which are 100% created by me if they happen. So that's kind of how this goes. To give you a little bit of background, so I said I'm Managing Director of Green Team Consulting. We are an energy and sustainability management company. We work with organisations all over the world, helping them to fulfil any energy requirement, which may be helping them to buy energy more effectively, manage energy, how they use it, where they use it. And something that's really grown for us in the last 5 or 6 years has been our relationships with people like NQA, where we are supporting organisations to implement effective management systems. So the reporting function for us has certainly become probably, if not the most important, right up there with some of the most important parts of our business. So as I said, we are specialists at working with organisations to implement management systems, as well as support with energy and carbon legislative compliance. And the two things do kind of merge together quite well. Over the years, with Green Team, we have organisations such as Williams Formula One, Diligenta, Seva Logistics, Virgin, etc. And we work with very large, but all the way down to very small organisations. If they have a requirement to report on carbon, this is something we can support them with. And either within Green Team or previous to Green Team, both myself and our team, we have worked with some of the largest energy consumers in the UK to support. So there's probably not a lot of kind of subject areas we haven't covered at some point. So fingers crossed there are most things that we can kind of help and answer for you. But I shall move on to the stuff we're all here for, which is not to hear about me specifically. So I think when you start considering data, so twofold really, the presentation specifically around kind of data, which is a very broad term, and then we'll tie it really back into energy, carbon, sustainability. As you said, we know some of the hot topics at the moment are specifically things like the PAS 2060 and those sorts of things, but it's still interesting to look at data from a more kind of holistic kind of point of view, really. And data's broken down into lots of different buzzwords and terms and everything else. So one of the most important things really is for as an organisation to work out what it is that's relevant to you and what it is that you're talking about. These are just some of the terminologies that we'll hear. And again, they may or may not be relevant. So, don't get kind of caught up with, things like big data. Obviously, that's kind of, one of the big buzzwords around data. And this is really kind of looking at everything. And the reality is for most organizations, looking at everything is not really pertinent. It's not necessary, and it's not particularly useful. So again, as far as any implementation of a data system, you need to take into mind kind of what do I need? Is the data I'm going to have, it's going to be structured or unstructured? I mean, that really kind of comes from where you're going to get it from. Again, is it spitting out from building management systems, very structured data? Do you need to report in a particular timed fashion? Is that relevant to you? Do you need to be able to look at something intraday? Again, it's quite important to understand exactly what your requirement's going to be. This one I particularly like, as they call it, digital exhaust machine data. Again, are you able to extrapolate information from machinery? And this could be boilers, or this could be looking specifically at injection molding machines, or whatever it might be. Are you able to extrapolate information from those systems that enable you to run your business more effectively? Massive consideration around the openness of your data. Who is the data going to be for? When we talk about management systems specifically, these are primarily internal. However, one of the considerations in terms of installing a management system is probably around business development or demonstrating certain credibility to certain people. So the data you're going to get, is this data that you do want to be sharing with people, or is this something that's going to be mainly internal? If we flip that, we start looking at things like legislative, so we start looking at things like mandatory carbon reporting as was, so SECA and those sorts of things. This is where the data is going to be far more open. So again, there's got to be an understanding of the quality of your data. If you're going to make your data open data, you're opening yourself up to people questioning that data. So that's quite an important thing to consider. But again, I think, without kind of reading through a PowerPoint presentation, the main thing really is kind of work out what it is that you are looking at your data for. Is it to implement a management system? Is it the carbon neutrality? Is it legislative? Is it to drive other business things? And then from there, you can kind of set out your goal of what sort of data you want. But as I say at the bottom, you can always move the goalposts. Data is data. And the other thing to remember is data is a constantly growing field. So the sorts of data you're going to be able to get are going to consistently develop as time goes by. So any system that you implement has to have the ability to move either with your commercial goals or with the ability to gain data. I think we've all heard this, although I have to say, given the recent Ukrainian situation and the increase in oil prices, this may not be slightly true as of now. But data is the most valuable resource we have in the world. Simple as, and I don't think that's ever going to change. So regardless of what you want it for, it's important. So if you're looking at this from an energy agenda, is it sustainability? Is it reducing costs? Is there a mix of those things? If we take it very simply down to energy management, you can look at why you use energy, how you use your energy, when you use your energy, and that has an impact then on the carbon footprint. If you can see how you're using it, how you're producing carbon, you can then look to reduce those things. Energy procurement, quite often the energy management and data fields sit very, very separately to the very simplistic task of buying the energy. And it is a really simple piece, and there's thousands of companies out there that do it. So whoever you might use, but the information you can gain from your business information is really going to support with buying the energy. And given the costs of energy have increased 200, 300, 400% in the last year, having some information to enable your business to buy smarter, when to buy, how to buy, what to buy it for, this could have significant financial impacts as well. So it's not just about having data from a corporate social responsibility perspective. There are also some fairly large cost advantages that you can have through having good data. But all in all, look, it just gives you control. That's kind of a pretty simple fundamental. So if I focus us a little bit more, I know that, so I asked before the webinar, what are kind of the hot topics at the moment? And, I knew that some things like legislation is going to come up, and I think somebody has already pinged a question around ESOS. So again, when I get a chance to read that, we can go through that. But what sort of data can you get? So where Green Team comes in, and this is supporting with the legislation, the management systems, those sorts of things, is primarily looking at these sectors. So we're primarily looking at your utilities, your gas, your power, your water. But what we're also looking at is, not just how not just how much you're using, but quantifying that, against cost. And obviously another kind of pretty hot topic is the fuels. So again, your petrol, diesel, LPG, biodiesel. That's an interesting one again, because we're then moving more and more into electric vehicles. So what kind of impact is your utilities going to be impacted by your fuels and logistics kind of going forward? But these are the kind of general areas that we're focusing on. So utilities, gas, power, water, fuels, petrol, diesel, LPG, biodiesel, oils, etc. We work a lot with logistics organisations, so again, trying to help those organisations understand the impact of their logistics, travel, flight. This seems to be an incredibly hot topic at the moment in terms of people getting on a plane to go somewhere. We work with a few Formula One companies, and the FIA are putting significant pressure on those Formula One organisations, slightly ironically, given they race a petrol engine around a track. But they're putting a lot of pressure on them at the moment to reduce the carbon impact of getting to the races, and they can't do that unless they understand. And their logistics are incredibly complex. They're moving, different people in different ways, different machinery, different places, covering different halls, etc., etc. So it's something that's quite an interesting one. And then again, I think one of the newer ones really, in terms of the energy reporting, is looking at the waste. Although it's not new, organisations have been reporting on waste and recycling for an incredibly long time. It is now becoming a much greater part of that kind of rounded, sustainability piece. And again, we've seen clients reduce costs significantly through understanding where their waste streams are going. So again, what we're really looking at is, discovering, how you organise your data, what you're using it for, and help your business to manage its existing kind of business, but also kind of move forward. How do you use this data for the analytics, driving business growth? Again, you can't really create an energy strategy without having access to this information, because the questions will always come, well, what are you trying to do? Where are you trying to get to? But you need to understand where you are in order to work out how you're going forward. We do find that the reports are really able to drive positive communication within a business. So when an organisation has reports that are very aligned to the things they do and the way they do it, and utilising their language, it can promote much cleaner communication with the business. There's a lot of time saved as well by having reports that work for those organisations. The next one down, the mitigate risk. Again, this one has become particularly prevalent more recently. I think those organisations that we've been working with for the last 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years that have a fairly good handle on energy waste, carbon, are in a much stronger position today to say, look, okay, we need to pull our costings back a little bit with the cost of energy. So they really already know some of those areas that they can focus on if they need to reduce their costs, or more importantly, understand where the energy costs are going in order to maybe apply a premium onto the product for sale. We're working with one of the big steel companies at the moment, and they're very much in that boat where they're kind of looking at this to say, we need to charge a premium. We don't know how long the premium's going to last, but we need to charge it. How much should we charge? How should we charge it? And again, this sort of information and data has enabled them to do that. We all know that everything you do, the questions are coming around, the environmental focus. we hear a lot that even when graduates are looking at what companies they join, they're considering the carbon footprint of that organisation. So this data is useful across all of these elements. And again, you know, the fact that you guys are on this webinar with NQA, you know, it's looking at, you know, the ability to have this data kind of externally verified, quantified. There's no point having data that you can't really rely on. There's no point having data that you can't sit back quite comfortably and say, you know, we're doing this, we're doing that, we're doing the other. Our data is at this point and that point. But it's also really useful to have historical data. So when we look at a lot of reports, we're putting historical information into those reports so we can look at where we were, where we are, and where we're going. And I think that's quite an important element of the reporting as well. So I think a comment that is made time and time again, and I'm going to say it once more, is you can't manage what you can't see, you can't manage what you can't measure. I think bespoke reporting is an integral part of business today. We have so much access to information systems, we have so much access to data that I don't really think you need to consider reporting as, I just need a generic box reporting. I think it's very, very, very appropriate for an organisation to sit there and say, look, we need bespoke data. You know, we want to build data around our business. We want to be able to see what it costs us to output a tonne. We want to see what our carbon footprint is to deliver that fruit package to Tesco's. And the likes of Tesco's are asking for it. You know, they are saying specifically to their suppliers, you know, unless you are an environmentally focused organisation, we don't want to do business with you. So I think that we are seeing this kind of grow. Sorry, I have to find my notes. We're seeing this kind of grow relatively quickly. But as I said, reporting is not something that's generic, but bespoke doesn't need to be complicated. And I think that's a really kind of important point to raise. You've got to consider the infrastructure within the business in order to report. You know, what are you trying to report? Do you have the right metering infrastructure? Do you have the right accounting infrastructure? Do you need smart meters? Do you need loggers? And I think the other thing that I always say to organisations is you have to report anyway. I know very, very few businesses that don't have some form of mandatory reporting internally. And the chances are, moving forward, there's a legislative requirement, you know, whether that is an ESOS, whether it's a SECA, whether you are bidding for public sector work and you have to have a carbon reduction plan. Whatever it may be, you're probably having to report anyway. You'll probably have some kind of counting costs. So we're not trying to, you know, reinvent the wheel, but we're trying to say that you're doing something anyway. So let's make it as good as it can be. And again, good reporting can give you an awful lot of business information. And again, one of the things we often talk about is cost of energy. Why have my costs gone up or why have my costs gone down? If it's simply a case of looking at the bill, going, well, last year I spent £100,000, this year I spent £200,000 or even £110,000 for, you know, a 10% difference, but I don't understand why I've spent that. It makes it very hard to kind of forecast kind of going forward. And weather, for instance, is one of those things that has an impact on there. So one of the things we do for some clients is put in a degree day data into their reporting. So they can get their report, they can say, look, I used X thousand kilowatts of energy, that cost me X £100,000 this year versus last year, but I understand one of the reasons I spent more money wasn't necessarily because I output more product, but it was because it simply was colder. So the more information you've got, the more educated decisions you can make upon the impact of your business, whether that's winning business, costs, or whatever it might be. What I thought I'd do, I'll just keep the time, I've got plenty of time. What I thought I'd do is talk about some of the key observations that we have seen over the years. As I said, we have supported hundreds and hundreds of organisations to put in place management systems, reporting mechanisms for a whole heap of different requirements. As I said, we work with organisations that supply the likes of McDonald's, and McDonald's will come along and say, you know, by 2020, 2021, 2022, you have to have implemented either a management system or you have to demonstrate a carbon reduction. So some are driven by supplier chain, some are driven by kind of just an internal drive to save costs, and some are driven by, you know, the current rhetoric around, you know, carbon zero and, you know, that sort of stuff. So I think some of the key observations for us really around this are, again, you can't manage what you can't see. So you've got to make sure that the reporting is designed to give you that data that you need. So take the time as an organisation to say, what data do I need and why do I specifically need it? And then really importantly, have that sort of a top-down drive on data. Again, we have had projects that haven't been implemented successfully into a business, primarily because somebody somewhere says, let's do this, but then, you know, the buy-in's not from the top down, and then they find it very difficult and fractured to get the information. So we need to make sure that you've got that. I think we have found that the most useful reports for people are unique. So, you know, don't rush, take the time, you know, put a lot of effort into the early discussions around, I said, what data you need, what you need it for, so on and so forth. And, you know, I think for us, on average, it takes somewhere around 3 months to fully implement a reporting system within a business. And that's making sure we've got access to all the accurate data, building the reports, getting the format correct, getting the language correct, getting the colorings correct, etc., etc. So a deep dive to understand what you actually need. We're also finding an awful lot of our customers are involving us within the supplier selection. So again, if they're looking at waste suppliers, gas suppliers, water suppliers, they want to engage with us to make sure that those suppliers can actually give them the data they're going to need. So it's becoming a fundamental part of the supply chain to have access to that data in order to output accurate reporting. So again, you've got to think quite carefully about, you know, I've got 200, 300 company cars. You know, I may historically, it's been the cheapest way to do it is just to let them run their own expenses and I'll just reimburse it. But it might make more sense to go down the fuel card route, not because you're saving money, but because it's enabling you to have better management and better data. Kind of going back to one of the previous slides, you know, data is the most expensive commodity, really. So, yeah, you've got to kind of look at those kind of things. Language and graphic style is important. Again, you're reporting anyway. We also find that if we can take a singular report and make that the internal report, we're saving an awful lot of time. I think one of the things we see is replication, same data being kind of taken from one graph to another, to another, to another. So again, I think one of the things we'll say is try and make it as uniform to your business as you can. And change and scalable. I know that particularly with the PAS 2060, we sat on a presentation the other week, we talked around scope 1, 2, 3, those sorts of things. Now I could go into that till I'm blue in the face, but I really don't want to start talking about energy scopes. But I think we just have to accept that the dynamics are changing and the dynamics are moving. So what you might need to report on today, you may need to go into a more granular basis in a year or 2 or 3 or 4. Or you might want to push that into your supply chain. So again, just make sure that it's changeable and scalable. Specifically with reporting systems, again, I quite happily plagiarised this from the NQA presentation the other week. You know, measurement is the #1 principle for the PAS 2060. So I know that carbon neutrality is something that an awful lot of organisations are focused on. It's all very well to sit there and say, I'm buying my energy green, I'm sourcing my suppliers to be as green as possible. But unless you can demonstrate this, there's very little point in banging the carbon neutrality drum. So, and I think if you want a management system in place, PAS 2060 specifically, you are going to need to have some form of measurement tool. And these, you know, the data, the reports simply will do that. And then the documents and validation, #4. So if we look at the top 4, we, you know, simply having this data and having a report is some of the most important things within that. So I think showing that, you know, it really is you know, a fundamental importance that people are going to need to do. And it's a similar pattern across all others. You know, if you've got a 50,001 or 14,001, you know, exactly the same thing. You know, data and reporting is becoming an absolute must. And I think if we look at the growth of our customer base over the last 5-6 years, I think the desire to implement effective management systems has certainly pushed forward the requirement for data and reporting. Again, I don't want to get too much into compliance because compliance will vary by different clients. But again, so what I'm trying to say, I think one of the primary things I'm trying to get across is you're going to need this data for so many different things. And what we see is this replication through business where they're doing it over and over and over and over again. So by kind of getting in there properly, understanding the data, getting the data in, you can get it reported across all the various things you're going to need to do. These are just some of the things that are currently part of the BEIS legislative requirement. Certain businesses will have to do an annual SECA report, and this is a carbon report. This looks at your fuels, this looks at your transportation, so on and so forth. ESOS, if you've got organisations that are trying to pitch to local authority nowadays, if the contract value, I believe, is over 5 million, you must have a carbon reduction plan. And this is something that needs to be published on your website and needs to be updated on a regular basis. Well, you can't really have a carbon plan unless you understand, what your current carbon footprint is and what you're looking to do. And I've had several conversations with organisations who are looking to put in place a carbon reduction plan, but they're not pitching for business at that scale. So I've kind of asked the question to say, why are you looking to put the carbon reduction plan in place? And they feel that it is becoming a fundamental part of that tender process, regardless of the size of the local authority or public sector work. So it is something they're looking to implement regardless. Heat regulations, these are things that are changing regularly. If there's an organisation of a climate change agreement, you don't necessarily need reporting for EPCs and DECs, but it makes it a lot easier if you have a large portfolio of property and you need to do these energy certificates. Having access to this information makes it a much cheaper process and an easier process to put these through. And then we have a new one, I say new, which is the TCFD, which is a new task force that's been set up, which is primarily looking at FSC regulated organisations. So I think what I'm trying to say is, it's growing. It's if you're not involved now, you will be soon. We know as a country, we've sat there and said we'll have carbon neutrality by 2050. I don't think you can turn the radio on without hearing the words net zero or tree planting or something like that. So again, these sorts of things, it's great for me because they're becoming an absolute necessity for most organisations. So having this data and reporting is going to be extremely useful going forward. A little bit of plugging our own drum at the end, and we produce an awful lot of reporting mechanisms, matrices for people, and this just shows you some of the sorts of things, some of the sorts of information, some sort of data you get. But as I said, everything's very bespoke and has to meet your particular need. And again, any questions anybody's got, fire back to NQA, fire back to me, and if anything comes up after this or interested in seeing the reports, seeing how they might work for your particular organisation. So that's it for me, and apologies, I have to say it was a very unusual experience kind of talking without anyone else talking at me for a period of time and only seeing myself on a webcam. I don't like looking at myself at the best of times, so having to just look at myself for 35 minutes is quite painful. But I'll have a look now at the questions and we'll see whether we can cover a few of those. So give me 2 seconds just to read them. Pat Neal has asked around, do we have a lead assessor piece for ESOS? Yes, that's something I can send over. I think one of the problems with ESOS was that an awful lot of organisations simply said, get me compliant. All I want to do is compliance. And that was ESOS phase 1, ESOS phase 2, don't care, just get me compliant. We're now nearly at the end of the ESOS phase 3, and many more organisations are saying, look, I'm going to have to keep paying this money, so I want to get something out of it. And the information held within all these reports is very useful from an ESOS piece. And plus, if you're in ESOS, you'll probably have to do SECA, and it's the same reporting. What do you feel the biggest impacts to green energy production are as a direct result of poor information security? And have you seen these impacts firsthand as I'm blending a PAS 2060 and ISO 27001? Do you know what? I think with all of these things, bad data has led to an awful lot of mistakes around green energy production, whether we're talking at a localized level, so we're talking about people implementing small scale solar or small scale wind, or whether we're talking about large scale systems that are feeding into the grid at a major level. I think if we look at the amount of misinformation there, or if we look at the amount of organisations that have no data at all, how can you sit there and say, I want to put a solar array on my roof, but I really don't know what my energy consumption is at my peak times. I don't know how I'm going to use it. So I think, hopefully that answers the question, John. But yeah, I think the long and short is it's very culpable in terms of a lot of extremely poor decisions for green energy generation, and then bad management. Again, if you've installed the amount of solar arrays we go and see and they're not functioning, but they've got no idea they're not functioning. Okay, we've got one from Lynn Dugan. Where are the outputs are recycled? Okay, the client is a scrapyard where their outputs are all recycled further in the supply chain. Is their outputs counted towards their carbon credits? No, not really. And again, you would need to have an awful lot of information in order to understand what's happening to that recycled product further down that supply chain. So they may say, well, I've recycled that, so I'm not going to take the carbon hit, as it were, but is it being recycled effectively, and are they able to demonstrate that? So I think there is an argument to say that if you are able to recycle effectively, you can remove an element of your carbon footprint, but again, you've got to document it. So hopefully that answers that one, but again, I'm just trying to rattle through this quickly. Can I ask about ESOS and ISO 50001? Ian, ask away. I think the long and short is that one of the routes to ESOS compliance is an ISO 50001, on the premise that if you have an ISO 50001, they will say that as an organisation you're taking all the necessary steps because the management system is a very robust management system. It tends to suit slightly large organisations, but we believe it's a very, very effective route to ESOS compliance. And I think for organisations that want to do ESOS properly, rather than do what I said earlier around the cheapest way to compliance, then I think the ISO 50001 is a very good system to look at. But again, we can expand that, Ian, because that's probably a slightly bigger question. I think you've asked the same thing, Ian. It is a route to compliance, so you can still use that. And are there any reporting systems you'd recommend for a large organisation trying to capture scope 3? Honestly, there are tons. There are an awful lot out there, and probably more than I can go through in here. So I'm hoping I've answered the questions as best as I can. I'm hoping there was information in there that people found useful. I'm hoping I didn't witter too long, but I kind of forgot I had notes. So some of the points I didn't raise as saliently as I might have wanted to. But I'd like to thank you all for your time, and happy to take any further questions that NQA can forward on to me as we go.